Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for listening. Well, as you know, we're on break from posting interviews for a while so that I can reboot the format of the show. And I have to confess, I hit a serious wall last month. I've got big plans for the reboot and, I just got a little stuck. But thanks in large part to the support of my lady and to some very good friends, I am back in action. So I can tell you that we're relaunching the interviews on August 21st. So mark your calendars. Now, today's episode is another crossover essay from the romantic relationship context to the political sphere. Now, I've been noticing more and more how the basic skills are applicable in each arena, and so I've got a few of these essays on the way. I call this one the worst case scenario. We're all simultaneously crying wolf. Here we go. We love to imagine worst case scenarios. It's something of a guilty pleasure for most of us, and one that we've collectively been overindulging of late. Global politics feels different than before, more frantic, more imminently dangerous, more personal. On one hand, it's critical to remain vigilant. We all know that's true. It's prudent to plan for the future, it's wise to have contingency plans, and it's vital that we stand strong against threats to our lives and our communities. We all have examples of disaster that resulted from ignoring a threat. We are biologically coded to prepare for disaster. It's simple survival to do so. And it's true that we are facing challenges today that present existential threats to humanity. And yet there's a dark side to this urge. Imagining terrible outcomes is entertaining, in a sense, if we're being honest. Because of the biological survival function inherent to them, our catastrophe fantasies release dopamine. Dopamine is addictive. We are literally addicted to imagining the worst case scenario, and we have been feeding that addiction to a fever recently. Ironically, the entrenchment that has resulted from our addiction to political hyperbole has landed us in a scenario that may in fact be the sort of threat we were only imagining before. In other words, our tendency to imagine disaster may actually be creating the disaster itself. Now, setting aside biology for a moment, negative stories are also seductive because they justify our beliefs. We can all point to the possible disaster in order to justify our ideas. The worse the possible outcome, the more justified we believe we are in our extremes. Now, deep down, we know that our extremes are not entirely defensible. No perspective is perfect, and the more extreme the idea, the fewer people for whom it's helpful. Besides, we all know that strength comes not from inbreeding, but from diversity. This is true not just genetically, but culturally, conceptually, and politically. On the flip side, actions arising from extreme perspectives have negative externalities. The nuclear option has dire consequences. Yet we still believe in our respective extremes. We think we must win the argument, and so we each use the most handy tool we have to make our point. Armageddon is coming. But if everyone believes the same fear-based argument of impending doom, all we do is polarize. Polarization, in turn, freezes out the creative genius that arises from healthy disagreement. Challenges and tensions create unexpected solutions when kept in balance with cooperation. But when we slip over the brink beyond cooperation to that place where we believe that anyone who disagrees with us is evil, we can't work to create. Now, locking up matters even further. One extreme perspective begets another. When threatened by another's extreme perspective, we respond by creating our own. You're going to kill me? Well, then I'm going to kill you first. Fundamentally, that's what each of us is saying. Even worse, when someone succeeds in something because of an extreme perspective, that emboldens them to create yet more of the same. See, I was right. I think I'll do that again. And so we enter a feedback loop of self-referential extremity. The good news is that ultimately such a system will break down. The bad news is that when that system is the world, such a breakdown makes for an awful lot of suffering. To move through this threat, we must return to core principles of cooperation. The alternative is dire. The challenge is that best case scenarios aren't quite as seductive. When we're in a negative frame of mind, happy futures seem naive. And yet, though we don't like to admit it, our thoughts create our world. Our expectations forge our experience, ideas lead to intentions, and intentions lead to actions. It starts with thought. Right now, our thoughts are rooted in fear, and we're fomenting more of the same. We're cultivating and fertilizing the garden of our fears. It's no wonder that our fears are growing and mutating. To ignore the dangers we face would be foolish in the extreme, yet to focus only on those dangers all but ensures their inevitability. We have all become positional in order to protect ourselves, but our positionality is feeding divisiveness. The more separated we become, the more impossible it appears to work for the common good. We now believe that anybody who does not agree with us must be actively evil, but that is not true. As hard as it is to see, with very few exceptions, we each make choices that we believe are the best for ourselves and our families. When we get past the rhetoric of individual decision-making, we find that fundamentally we each want the same thing: peace, safety, happiness. We want prosperity. In the romantic context, perhaps the most effective tool to resolve such a dispute, it basically has 3 steps. First, you calm down the amygdala, the fight or flight response, so that rational dialogue is possible. Second, you step into the universe of your partner's perspective and ask questions until you fully understand it, and both of you do this for the other. Third, you talk about what you can co-create so that you both feel safe or happy or whatever it is that you need. It's simple. No self-help books or gurus required. It works every time if you actually do it, and if you don't do it, well, a breakup is probably in your future. Given the simplicity of this process, the only real question is why we don't allow ourselves to do this when we know it works. And that is where the work often lies. The same holds true in our political environment. Yes, I know you're right. I know you're justified. I know the other side is dangerously naive. I know the other side misunderstands the facts. I also know that if we don't arrive at a middle ground, we're headed for war. It's naive to think otherwise. And yes, sometimes you have no choice but to fight for what matters the most. But this is not a decision to be taken lightly, nor rushed into emotionally. War is nearly always the worst possible option. Every alternative must be explored first, and we haven't even begun that grueling work because we're addicted to our opinions. We're blind to the value that the other side brings to the table. We haven't even begun to inquire where we might be wrong. We haven't even begun to ask the question of why we can't even begin this work. Perhaps you point to the Nazis or to Stalinist Russia and ask whether we should have sought to understand their perspective. Now, I won't go down the rabbit hole of inquiring whether those groups had any value to offer humanity. The evil of their methods too far outweighs any theoretical value to make that inquiry useful. I will say, however, that the erstwhile debate between American conservatives and American liberals is not the equivalent of a debate between Nazis and European Jews. Say what you will about the totalitarian ineptitude of our contemporary politicians, whom I agree must absolutely be held to account, and that accounting must be based on facts. The views of the voters are where we all must start. Those individual humans are not Nazis. They are not, quote, complete idiots, nor are they totalitarians, nor mass murderers. These are humans who believe that they are doing the right thing. Start with those people. That is where the immense power and the collective opinions of the common American lies. This is not to say that you must sacrifice your ideals. Facts matter, and adherence to those facts is critical to a free society. Holding healthy boundaries and standing for your values is fundamental to your sanity. But in this political context, before you can functionally execute on your ideas, you need to understand the value of the other perspective. It does have value. Pretending that away only means that you're too terrified to engage, and healthy engagement is the definition of effective function. Yes, we must all be held to account, and yes, some political policies are better than others, but we must arrive at our policies by the messy process of compromise. Otherwise, we end in frustration, ineptitude, and hate. Well, that's it for our episode today, folks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out and let me know what you think of the show, or if you have any ideas for the reboot, please go ahead and email me at host@together.guide. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/togethershow, and we're on Instagram and Twitter, both at together_show. All right, folks, that's it for this week. Talk to you next week. Bye for now.